I mentioned last week that I really like Advent, and I don't know how many of us are reading through this short meditation each day, preparing for Christmas by Richard Rohr. But some of the things that he's talked about this week, and also some of the parts that were part of Suzanne's focus last week, were about preparing your hearts and your minds for the coming of Christ. And so I thought it might be helpful to talk this morning for our discussion about how we individually are doing that. Maybe it's some things that you do every year during this time of Advent to prepare for Christmas, or maybe it's some things that you have taken up this year in preparation for Christmas. But to discuss this morning, how are you making room for Christ this Advent season? Well, thank you all for sharing. I've grown to appreciate Advent as a season, as a spiritual practice. I appreciate the themes that seem to build on one another: hope and peace and joy and love, culminating in the celebration of the birth of Jesus. And I love that prayer that Amy shared, the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. At the end, it talks about shifting our focus from what we get to what we give, or ways we live out our faith, rather than being the recipients of understanding or consolation, that we become people who console others and who love others. And I'm definitely desire to continue that theme today, looking at the idea of peace not as necessarily just something that Christ brings to our lives, but something that we can bring to others. So that's our topic for today, is bringing peace, and how we can live that out as an aspect of love every day with the people around us. So I looked at this idea of how we can bring peace to other people, and one of the ideas that kept recurring was starting on the same side. When I put this image up, which side are you on? Just a simple question. You probably have ideas, depending on whatever topic pops into your mind, about which side you're on. It could be political or religious. Within our religion, it could be many different ideas, whether we do things this way or that way, whether this idea about God is true or this other seemingly opposite side is true. We are very much a culture that picks sides. You might have a favorite football team, and they probably have a rival, and you probably don't like them very much. Like, every single thing in our life seems to be about picking sides. And there's a verse in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. It's in the middle of this discussion on how Jewish followers of Jesus could possibly get along with Gentile followers of Jesus, specifically talking about whether you are obligated to follow all 613 rules in the Old Testament or not. And it says this: "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility." For followers of Jesus, this seemingly vital question, do I follow all of the law or not? Am I required to or not? This question is put into the context of, we are one. We are not on opposite sides. We are all one as followers of Christ. And so the author here is admonishing the Christians in Ephesus not to view each other as on different sides of a debate, but to approach each other as if they're already on the same side and just discussing what it means to follow Jesus. Living very practically, one way that I've found most beneficial to live this out is to just straight up tell people, regardless of the disagreement, to start off the conversation, I am on your side. I think if we can verbally acknowledge that, it does two things. One, it lets the other person know your very clear intention. I'm not here to fight you. We might have some healthy debate, but I'm starting off on your side. Also, when I say it out loud, it holds me to the commitment that I am, in fact, not fighting with this other person, but I am literally on their side. We're approaching something that we both have a perspective on, and coming to the agreement up front that I'm on their side, and that they are on your side as well. It changes a conversation when you start off that way, if you start on the same side. So in learning to live out peace and living out love in this way, we can start on the same side to bring peace to all of our relationships. It takes practice. It's a little bit awkward at first, but sometimes just verbally acknowledging it is all it takes to get started on the right foot. Next is to watch your mouth. I talked about a little bit about this last week, about how our words really have power, and the things that we either choose to say or just let fly from the front of our face can shape relationships for a long time to come. And I talked about this idea of our words having power, almost like in some of our favorite stories that magicians or wizards like Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings seem to have an amazing amount of influence just by the words that they say. And that's in fact an archetype that we can live out in our lives as well. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 and 11, it says, "For whoever desires to love life and see good days," and I just want to pause here. I think that's pretty much all of us. I think we all desire to love life and to see good days. It seems like maybe there's not been a lot of love of life lately, and that maybe we're living in bad days. But for whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. Often the path of peace starts with what we do with our words. We can not manage our mouth very well and say things that we maybe instantly or later regret, that shapes a relationship for a long time to come. Or we can be intentional. We can decide on what the message we want to share is beforehand. To maybe pause and take a minute, because the words that we say can often direct our path, either in individual relationships or in our life in general. We can use our words to intentionally set the tone of relationships. It's often like a rudder of a ship, and I think that image is found in the Bible, in the image of just a spark can set a whole forest ablaze. That's what the tongue is like. In the same way, not just in damaging ways, but a little bitty thing can set the course of your life. It can set the tone of relationships, like a rudder on a ship. The rudder is a piece of metal or wood that really, compared to the rest of the ship, is insignificant. But because of where it is and how it moves, it can turn a gigantic ship, just this relatively small piece of metal. The same is true of our words. And we can use our words to intentionally set the tone of our relationships. So my admonishment to me, and if you need it, is to watch your mouth and use your words to bring peace, because such a small member of our body really can do such a thing. Thirdly, to live out love in the means of bringing peace is to find common ground. Perhaps one of the biggest debates in the Bible, like worldwide debates, was whether followers of Jesus could eat meat that had been sacrificed to an idol. They would often take this meat, they'd sell it in the marketplace, and the discussion was whether a Christian had an obligation to avoid that meat because it's been offered up to a pagan god, or whether it doesn't matter because everything comes from God anyway, and it's fine for us to eat. This was a debate. So think of whatever you consider the biggest religious debate to be in our time. That's the level of debate this was. People all over the Roman Empire were talking about whether this was okay to do or not for followers of Jesus. In Romans chapter 14, verse 17, Paul says, "For the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit." I think what Paul is saying here is, again, it doesn't particularly matter what side of this debate you come down on. Just do what you think is best. That's great, but don't judge the people that do differently from you. Because of this word righteousness, I looked it up. I think we have some connotations around the word righteousness, like self-righteousness or holier than thou. But what this word is, it literally means just impartial justice. So not taking a side in whatever debate you're on, but zooming out and looking at the whole perspective, seeing the big picture, the way that God does, because really only God is impartial and God can see both sides of this debate. So be like that. Be like God, who doesn't take the side of arguing, but has brought unity. Bring unity in this situation as well. And that leads to peace and joy, which coincidentally are some of our Advent themes. One of the ways that I ran into this week is if you're reading along in the Richard Rohr Advent book, he used this Latin phrase, and I don't speak Latin, so I don't know how to say it. But basically, the translation of this is, in light of eternity, will this matter at all? And I think that's true of that debate about whether we should eat meat or not. Many of our political disagreements or the differences we seem to have with other followers of Jesus, in light of eternity, don't matter so much. Instead, if we keep in mind our real goal, to be followers of Jesus who live out love, who are the incarnation of Christ in the world, if we keep that in mind, many of these disagreements that we have with people just simply don't matter. And maybe if eternity is too big of a picture to look at, you could phrase it, in 1 year, a year from now, will this even matter to me? Will this particular disagreement or will this issue that I disagree with someone about, is it really that big of a deal? That helps me keep things in perspective, because sometimes thinking about eternity is huge. But if we keep in mind our real goal, what's the point of being in this relationship? What are we hoping to bring? That can help us keep a lot of things in perspective. We can find common ground and keep our priorities straight in looking at the big picture. So these are 3 ways that we can live out peace. We can bring peace to the people in our lives. We can tell them, I am on your side. We can use our words to intentionally set the tone for our relationships. And we can keep in mind our real goal, to be livers of love in a world that so desperately needs it. I ran across this verse, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 20, and it does tie together well this idea of intentionally living out peace with next week's theme of living out joy. It says, deceit is in the hearts of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace, those bringers of peace in the world, they have joy. And next week we'll look at how we can live out this advent of joy in our lives. But may you approach people starting from the same side. May you use your words to set the direction for relationships. May you keep your relationship goals in the perspective of love. And may the peace you bring lead to joy.